So when I launched the project last fall, not quite a year ago, I had this, I thought, crazy reach goal of giving away mineral rights to a 3-acre Oklahoma property, giving it away to 1,000 people. I thought it was a big number, reachable with a lot of effort and a lot of luck. Well, as of today, we have 1,300 signups. I think we have proof of concept, at least in terms of getting people to, or encouraging people to participate in a, temporally and geographically distributed art project that potentially could last for generations. And I think that's really exciting.
This time on the Plutopia podcast, artist Eliza Evans returns with an update on her activist art project, All the Way to Hell. We also talk about fracking, the oil industry, nonprofit organizations, hybrid art forms, and much more.
Hey everybody, welcome to another installment of the Plutopia News Network podcast. Joining Scoop and I today, Eliza Evans. Eliza visited us once before. She is an artist. She experiments with sculpture, print, video, textiles to identify disconnections and absurdities in social, economic, and ecological systems. And her latest, this may still be the latest, or she may have something later. We'll find out when we talk to her. But one environmental art project that we had talked about when she visited us the last time, All the Way to Hell, has appeared in the New York Times, Art in America, Hyperallergic, a contemporary art site, the Brooklyn Rail, and other art publications. And Scoop knows something about that one too. He's been following it. So we'll look forward to discussing that and all the other things that may come up. Tell us what's happening with your art project.
Okay. Well, good things. And thank goodness we're talking today, because it even changed a bit yesterday. So just, I can't remember exactly when we talked last. Was that 7-8 months ago?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay. So, so when I launched the project last fall, not quite a year ago, I had this, I thought, crazy reach goal of giving away mineral rights to a 3-acre Oklahoma property, giving it away to 1,000 people. I thought it was a big number, reachable with a lot of effort and a lot of luck. Well, as of today, we have 1,300 signups.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because the last I saw it was 1,200.
Yeah, well, right. I mean, that was we got a shout out on Emily Atkins' Heated news site, if you're familiar with that. And it just started rolling in. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know about it. I just saw the signups start rolling in. And I mean, we are ready. I already had close to 500. And I at which point I would be comfortable go ahead and filing the deed and moving on to the next thing for the project. And so I've just decided to leave it open. And even there was a big spurt over the weekend, but they're still coming in more slowly for sure. But I think people are sharing it.
And this is one where the more the merrier, right?
Exactly. I mean, according to the county clerk with whom I spoke, over a year ago, in theory, there could be 1 million owners. There's nothing in law that limits the number of owners a particular property can have. Now, I can't afford to file a deed with 1 million owners because you pay per page, but I think we have proof of concept, at least in terms of getting people to, or encouraging people to participate in a temporally and geographically distributed art project that potentially could last for generations. And I think that's really exciting. And and so so yesterday, I got a check, a fairly sizable one, in the mail. It was this organization called the Puffin Foundation, and they support all kinds of mostly creative projects, not only fine arts, but music, film, poetry, and then apparently they support crazy projects like this, but they don't do any of their interaction via email. If you send a paper proposal to them, and their way of telling you got the grant is they just send you a check. So
what's paper? This paper of which you speak?
Yes, I know. Yeah.
That seems a little odd. I recall I once wrote. I wrote something for I don't know, a literary journal one time, and they required me to send them a paper copy of it, and I couldn't understand they were emailing. Why didn't I just email it to them? It was so strange.
Yeah, some lawyers got involved there, I'm sure. Where have you gotten? You've gotten positive feedback. How about negative feedback? Since you've been publicizing this, have you received hate mail?
Oh, that's a great question. The biggest pushback is from my family.
Oh, interesting.
And it's not coming to me directly. It's coming through the family grapevine, right, because we're not of one mind when it comes to politics or the environment or what we need to do to have any kind of desirable future. So that's where I'm at. So I haven't yet had to deal with it directly.
So are you saying that you're a Trump supporter and all the rest of them are supporting Biden? Is that it?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah, there you go. Before we go any further, I should just quickly summarize, or you could summarize what the project's about. Why don't you just say in a sentence or two exactly what's going on for people who may not have listened to our earlier
Sure.
episode?
So a little backstory. I inherited, 3 acres from a great aunt, and those 3 acres are in Oklahoma, a place I've never been.
Did you inherit the physical as well as the mineral rights?
Yes, I did. And it's 3 acres that's part of a much larger, I think it's about 150 acre piece, and I own 3 acres of that, but I don't own any specific 3 acres. And so I own a percentage, really. But when we talk about property and mineral rights, no one talks in percentages. So the other owners, in their holdings the other owners of the surface severed their minerals and sold them off long ago. At least that was what they reported to us. So as it happens, the surface has been for sale for several years. And as yet, there still is no sale, which is tragic for me, because really I was going to use the proceeds from selling the surface to fund this project. So I'm still waiting. So we'll see. Even with land prices going crazy, this must be a highly undesirable bit of land. But so in places where there has been a lot of extraction of any kind, oil, natural gas, minerals, what have you, frequently the subsurface is separated from the surface. So if anywhere in Texas, Oklahoma, or the Mountain West, or North Dakota, or now even in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, if you buy a house, you want to investigate who owns the mineral properties and who owns the mineral properties around you, because now, there are people living on the Front Range of Colorado who have an oil well in their backyard. Here they thought they were enjoying the beauty of the Rocky Mountains, and they're being made ill by, all the things we use to frack.
Oh, that raises an interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
If you own the physical property rights and somebody else owns the mineral rights, do they have an automatic lien to be able to put that oil well on your property?
Yes, they do. Yes,
okay.
They do. Now, it is, how the laws that govern property are state laws. And so there's going to be some slight differences amongst the states. But in all cases that I am aware of, which would be focused on, oil and gas states, mineral rights are superior to surface rights, which means, and you run into this problem in Texas and Oklahoma, which has a lot of solar resources. So if you have a surface owner who wants to put up a large solar array, or allow, a solar company to put up a large solar array, they have to get permission from the mineral right owners, and the mineral right owners can either veto it or extract some sort of compensation for allowing the solar installation to go ahead. So
I'm guessing the logic or illogic behind that is they want to reserve the right to drill an oil well in place of those solar panels or those windmills.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yes.
Wow.
Well, I'm surprised by not really by your family reaction, because I grew up, I'm a child of the oil and gas business. My first home after birth was a company housing project in Louisiana near a gas plant my dad was building. And that's what he did. He started out building gas and oil plants in Colombia and in Louisiana and finally in Texas. And so I grew up in that environment. So I'm probably, it's not lucky that they don't know about the stuff I do these days. But I would imagine my dad would be perturbed by my lack of loyalty to the oil and gas cadre.
Oh my gosh, you're really disloyal. I had no idea. Well, so the last part of that is that you have this bit of mineral rights that you can sell off, and you're selling it off in so many pieces, as many people as you can sign up, not selling it off, but giving it away, so that it makes it really difficult for anybody who wants to drill there to be able to acquire the rights, because they have to go talk to, right now you're up to 1,300 people, and maybe, you'll get 2,000, 3,000, 4,000.
That's exactly the point. It would not be impossible for them to acquire the rights, but there definitely is a bureaucratic impediment, and bureaucracy is expensive and time consuming. And what is often not appreciated by those who aren't really paying attention to the fracking industry is fracking is really expensive. They do not easily make money. I mean, there's a lot of technology involved. There's a lot of human capital involved. It varies from formation to formation. Some formations are easier to frack than others, but I think the average is, in fracking, you have to have a minimum of $50-$55 for a barrel of oil, and natural gas is worth almost nothing. Storage seems to be always teetering on the, everything's full. So they don't want natural gas at all, or very little, or the oil. Look at where oil has been for the last little bit. I think it's now around $65 a barrel. So even at that price, they're not making a lot of money. So anything that you can do to make it just that much more expensive, I think, will kind of make them think twice. And it depends on the operator too. So it's an experiment, if it's over a particularly vital piece of shale, yeah, they will spend the time and the resources necessary to frack it. But again, looking at how the industry is structured, often, the letters that I've been receiving, and that, I've heard, talking to other people now, they're also getting letters for mineral rights they didn't even know they owned, because some ancestor 3 or 4 generations ago owned it, and no one bothered to keep track of it. And so people get letters. Oh, what was the point of this?
Well, we were just summarizing, right?
Yeah. So yeah. So the people who are writing them letters are landmen. They very rarely are they working directly for the company that's going to be doing the drilling, and often they don't know who the client driller is, and that's very intentional. The industry thrives in opacity. Because they want mineral right owners of every size to be disadvantaged and to have no, position to bargain.
Yeah, I used to own mineral rights. I dealt with those guys. I even had a landman show up at my house to make sure that he got me to sign right then and there on, I think it was a lease. And, we had these leases and get checks, and sometimes you get a big check, sometimes you get a small one. But it happens that where my rights were, they discovered the largest estimate of continuous oil that they've ever assessed in the United States is there. It's the Wolfcamp Shale area out. Where is that? It's in West Texas.
Right. So that's Permian Basin, right?
Exactly. So
and
it's considered to be they say technically recoverable, but the cost of recovery is really high. But they had a boom out there, and I ended up selling off all of my mineral rights when I started getting like offers I couldn't refuse. Not the horse's head in the bed, but like money. And
right.
And it was very interesting. It was kind of like a gold rush out there, and that was because they were speculating that eventually the price of oil would be significantly high enough for them to be able to afford to drill and pull out all of this oil. But then the oil prices ditched, so it just depends on oil prices coming way up again for them to be able to recover the oil. And eventually whoever bought that stuff will probably get millions and millions of dollars that I'll never see. But I figured, I may be dead in 2 weeks, so go ahead and grab it now. But it didn't ever occur to me to give it away.
Well, it's another family member with that I'm talking to about potentially taking over some rights, for the next may not be the next one, but an action of this project. They were offered $27 to buy her share of minerals outright. When I saw the letter that was written on, I just laughed out loud. And because it is a ridiculously tiny, portion, of what, in the 1840s was a decent piece of land. But since the family has, it's a couple hundred people. So, yeah, and so I tracked down other family members, and they all got similar offers. So I'm like, that's crazy. That's really crazy.
Well, they always come in with the low ball, and they're not going to go out and offer you millions because they want those millions. They don't want you to have that. But you're concerned about fracking, but growing up in that business, the gas business was just as nasty when it comes to the things they do to the earth, because they have to store. My dad's plant produced liquid petroleum gas, and they had to store that somewhere. And what they did is they washed out an entire salt dome under the ground, a huge salt dome, and that was their storage tank. And as a result of that washing out of that salt dome, they poisoned the water table. Well, not so much poisoned it, but made it so salty that it was undrinkable. John experienced that water, and so did my dad. One of his I guess his paying for his sins was that my mother made him go get good drinking water because the tap water was undrinkable. So that was his burden in his retirement, was being a water boy.
Wow.
Whereabouts was that, Scoop?
In West Texas, in Big Spring, the same town where John grew up, and it destroyed the water table. It was terrible. But,
wow.
It's not unusual. Things like that are allowed to happen simply because the oil and gas industry basically owns the Texas government. They're passing legislation that, prevents people from going to renewable resources. They've been trying to. They want to cut those loose from any kind of benefit they get and leave those only for the oil and gas industry.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of extractive states are doing this. Oklahoma, like if you're off the grid and able to power your own home, whether it's solar or wind, you have to pay a tax, like a self-procurement tax, because you have to pay a tax for not being attached to the grid. So they're trying to preempt choice, which one would think is what conservatives really like, but they don't.
Well, they don't like it when it impacts their investments.
Yeah, precisely. And it's interesting how, like in trying to find the next site, I look out west, and I don't really have any prospects in Colorado, but the anti-fracking infrastructure is so much more robust there. Like they've put in some additional regulation because too many people ended up with rigs in their backyard, and they're like, oh, that shouldn't happen. So now I think well pad can't be closer than half a mile from a residence. And of course, the oil and gas folks don't like this at all. But it would be interesting to see how this kind of intervention plays out in a state where they're not on equal terms for sure, but those who resist fracking have a larger, more robust community.
The fracking, the anti-fracking movement in Texas has become more robust simply because we are all of a sudden a seismically active area, and that was unheard of. Earthquakes, I never experienced an earthquake growing up in Texas, and they have them all the time around Dallas, Fort Worth, all over North Texas, and they're, it's happening anywhere there's been fracking because it's disrupted the structure of the ground underneath us.
Yeah, and a lot of that is from the disposal of the fracking water, where they were injecting it into perhaps some old wells. So that can be very geologically disruptive. And I think it happened first in Oklahoma, and they tried to ignore it. But even the Oklahoma folks, they have to admit, yes, this seismic activity is caused by fracking. So, and it's people think of West Texas, and you look at, the Midland area, and it's just, you look at just from Google Earth, you look at the infrastructure, and it's amazing, like what they have done to the landscape there. But then if you look at one of the biggest, the Permian Basin is without doubt, it's huge. But in the Northeast, in the Marcellus Shale, it is also huge. But underneath the Marcellus Shale is something called the Utica Shale, which is even huger. But it was not reachable technologically until very recently. So now they can go 3 miles. And so it's just is it just a matter of time until they can go 5 miles, 10 miles if it's worth it economically. John, I mean, you've observed technology, how technology progresses, especially when there's when there's motivation. So I don't think, but what confounds drilling there is just the population density and how the impacts are not removed from, higher population centers. So it's, I think it's more of a challenge from a regulatory environment, even though the resources are definitely there geologically.
You were talking about how they've changed the geography out there. Every time I would fly home to visit, flying into Midland, and I would watch the landscape that we were flying above, and it was like it had been tattooed with all these geometric patterns. Oil camps have their roads all laid out in geometric designs, and all the wellheads and pump jacks that are out there, and it's like looking at an electrical circuit, only that's our land, and that's what they did to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's also got a kind of a freakish beauty, because I think humans are drawn to patterns, imposing or recognizing a pattern within what is perceptibly chaos. But that kind of, we know it's a massive visual disturbance, and now we know that this disturbance reverberates forever. It doesn't go away. Yeah. And we have to live with it.
I was trying to find an image of that, but I can't find one readily online. I've noticed that same patterning of the desert out there, and it tends to be in like kind of flat desert areas. I guess that's where all the oil is. It used to be a basin, or it used to be underwater. Used to be part of the ocean.
Yeah.
So yours is in Tennessee, right?
My what?
The property. Yeah.
No, Oklahoma.
Oklahoma. Oh, yeah. It's not on that part of Oklahoma that they just gave back to the Native Americans, is it?
Yes, it is.
Wow.
I was a little bit late in learning about this, but I've started. I've done a lot of homework since. So the Supreme Court decided, I think it was July, sometime in the summer of 2020, that Congress never acted to dissolve the Muskogee Reservation. Muskogee, also known as the Creek Nation. And, in the actual court case had to, it was a horrible instance of one Muskogee Nation member murdering another indigenous person, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court that there was no state or federal jurisdiction over this crime because it took place on a reservation, and that reservation was Tulsa. And so the Supreme Court decided or agreed, yes. And Gorsuch wrote the lead opinion saying, yeah, we have to take Congress at its word. This reservation was never dissolved. And it applies, I believe, to all 5, what they call the civilized tribes. So these were the 5 tribes that were moved from the, violently removed from the Southeast and resettled in Oklahoma. So that puts, I can't remember, a huge portion of Oklahoma is a reservation. Now, the oil and gas companies are fighting this tooth and nail. And so
I bet.
And it will, in some form or another, make its way again to the Supreme Court, which is now configured differently. So we'll see what happens.
Wait, to a different Supreme Court? I mean, once it's been to the Supreme Court.
But
it's more conservative.
Yeah, it's more conservative now, but and so they're not going to try the same case, obviously, but they'll find another case and attempt to overturn the 2020 decision.
How likely is that, though? It doesn't seem very likely. Once the Supreme Court has ruled on something.
Well, look, except for Gorsuch, all the supposed textualists voted against what the actual text says. So I have no confidence that the 2020 decision will stand because the implications are huge, and they're trying to scare people that a lot of people will be let out of jail. That the 5 nations will go take back their land, when that's not going to happen. What might change over time, none of this is going to happen tomorrow, but the administration of the land. So therefore, the taxes that Oklahoma receives, the state of Oklahoma receives, just like Texas receives, at the wellhead, where do those taxes go? Who gets to administer the drilling permits and for how much? So I think this is fascinating, and it's a real opportunity to see what indigenous governance can do on a much broader scale.
So you're saying individual property rights wouldn't change, but the management of those property rights would shift to the Indian nation, basically.
Perhaps. Now, because the Supreme Court decision was only about a criminal justice matter. But
I see.
But the oil and gas and the folks, and the whole state of Oklahoma, at least from the representatives and the bureaucracy itself, they're putting everything they've got.
Well, it's too bad Merle Haggard's not around right now.
Yeah, there's a podcast called This Land, which is 5 or 6 episodes that really unpacks the entire case and goes into the history. Is riveting. It's really worth a listen, and I think all of us who originate from white settlers have reason to pay attention because this is our history too.
Yeah.
Well, my family originates from the original people. My mom's family was Choctaw. My dad was Irish and Cherokee from Oklahoma. And in our family, that news was greeted with great joy. And our non-native acquaintances in Oklahoma met it with something less enthusiastic. It was more like fear, and they're expecting to have teepees set up in their backyard. That's the kind of stories that are going around. They're going to be moving in. They're going to take over a house.
Well, that's fascinating. And I mean, so the Choctaw, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Creek / Muskogee, and the Seminole, they are the 5, quote, civilized tribes. But I don't know about the others, but with Muskogees, because the reservation was allotted, which means individual tribal members were given allotments of land. And this was a very early effort to make them more like white people, in terms of owning land. It also set up a system where it was pretty easy to steal it from them. And this podcast gets into a lot of those shenanigans. Like you could claim a native child was not being cared for, had been abandoned, and a white family could adopt that child, and as consideration for taking that child into their family, supposedly, they got the land that was coming to the child. I mean, there was a lot of legal and bureaucratic malfeasance. And I'm sure some of it, after the Trail of Tears was quite violent as well. So, and the great-grandfather who originally had these mineral rights, he had a hardware store in Creek County, and he bought the hardware store, like the building that became the hardware store, directly from the Muskogee Nation. And I know nothing about the story other than that piece of paper. Then he purchased it directly. Whether was it a fair and open sale, or was it under duress? I have no way of knowing. So.
Yeah, from my readings of the times that you're talking about, a lot of people, a lot of families, Native families, gave up their property simply because it was untenable. They were given something that was not conducive to their lifestyle, the way the Native people lived. Many were given really nasty plots of land that were great maybe for an oil well, but not really great for raising your family.
Oh, right. They would divide the parcel into two and put them 6 days travel apart. And if you didn't tend to both parcels, it was, quote, abandoned. Yeah, so that. It was all intentional. None of this was for the benefit of the people who were forcibly, removed. None of it. Yeah.
Well, you did this as an art project,
yeah.
And it seems like it's morphed into something more than just an art project. It's become a political project, a human rights project, actually.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's hybrid. Like I'm this, I have a couple of art installations in upstate New York. This in October, it will be on a wall in the Bronx Museum. It's on a wall right now at the Missoula Art Museum. And so I will continue this because I think that these hybrid art forms, I think there's more of an audience or tolerance for them, tolerance by, traditional art institutions, and also just a hunger by artists and others to see something different. I still love making things. I haven't had much of an opportunity. I really enjoy making things with my hands. This project is different. It's conceptual, it's abstract, and it's activist. So, which means it's kind of hard to find an art or activist home because it's not really either. But it's also a slow project, so it has a chance to evolve. So just recently, have I gotten any exposure in, more climate-related news or climate-related activism until really just 2 months ago, or even less. It was solidly in the art world. That was all the exposure I got. Then a fellow artist reached out to me, and he's also an art writer, and he wrote a piece on it that was in the summer issue of Dissent magazine. And so that was like the first time I got exposure to a much wider audience, and generalist audience, generalist progressive audience. So that was really critical. And we'd been talking for months, and neither one of us, knew what to do with it. But he was the writer; it was his job to figure it out, and which outlet made the most sense. So it's still a creative project. So I've been admitted to a creative projects incubator that runs in New York City. It's a year-long program. So going back to some of my previous life, incubators and whatnot. This will never be, a business or a traditional organization, but something that is sustainable and ongoing is the goal. And it won't, and ongoing doesn't mean repeating this particular action all over the country. I mean, I'm going to do some of that, but I've got other ideas for intervening into these unproductive systems from a standpoint of, survival.
Are you 100% doing art, or are you still doing some of that, like business incubation, entrepreneurial support kind of stuff?
I still do some more market research for very early projects. It tends not for. I've had the same couple of clients for a lot of years now, so not so much startups, but clients who have startup ideas. Or sometimes I'll bring them a startup idea, like for a different market they hadn't thought about, or a different way to convert their products or skill sets into something else. Art is a terrible idea from a making a living point of view, and that's okay, because to say the truth, I know very few artists who make their living by making art. Nearly everybody has to do something else.
Well, Scoop and I doing Plutopia here, we've been getting in the high single digits per month.
Woohoo!
Yeah, we're definitely not in it for the money. I always joke about, we were not legally a nonprofit. It just worked out that way.
Well, I actually set up an LLC to run this project because I thought about doing the nonprofit thing because that would look all nice for funders. And I'm like, forget it. That's a lot of overhead. The application process is not trivial. And I'm like, no, just, quick, fast. And I don't think, as long as you're transparent about it, no one expects purity. Believe me, I am losing money on this. I'm not even in the low single digits. So, and I
sort of love the LLC thing. I mean, but compared to all the other ways that you can organize as a nonprofit or even as a for-profit, it's so much simpler,
Yeah, and that's what we did.
Yeah, that's what we did too.
Yeah, but I did that also. I domiciled in Wyoming because I understand for LLCs that have no intention of going public, that's an interesting place to be, and there's some added liability protection that's assumed by just being a state, being domiciled in the state. So again, it's like playing around with, the tools of capitalism to make some trouble.
A lot of people don't realize that nonprofits run a lot like capitalist organizations.
Right,
and,
exactly.
I've never worked for a nonprofit that didn't really think about money all the time, unless they just weren't in it for the money. I mean, I did this one, EFF Austin, which, I've done for years, has never really focused on money. We focused more on talent and trying to get certain things done. And if we raised money, it was to get a specific thing done. But most nonprofits are constantly they're trying to run a business, right? So they're trying to figure out how to pay their employees and how to cover all their expenses and all that stuff. The only way that you can operate as either a nonprofit or an LLC or whatever and not think about that stuff is to organize so simply that you really don't have appreciable expenses.
Right, but there are a lot of really great organizations doing good work, and people deserve to eat.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So, but you have to be careful because we know there's a lot of waste too.
I'm just saying that nonprofits and for-profits aren't that different. They, the only difference is in kind of what they do with their profits, if they have any profits, and a nonprofit doesn't really have profits. It just funnels the money back into the organization, whatever that organization is. And I don't know much about B Corps. I'm not sure what's required for those.
I looked into that, and I just decided it wasn't worth the headache. I think for companies that do expect to make profits, it's a viable option.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm not expecting. Someday I just hope to have enough money to take the next step. But that's, I'm terrible at this. Whenever I get a grant for an installation or a project, I put everything into the project. I never pay myself.
I feel your pain. I've done that.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I have a lot of friends who've worked in nonprofits, and their main complaint is, I'm spending so much time trying to get grants and get donations and get money into the nonprofit that I don't have time to do whatever our goal is. Whatever the purpose is of the nonprofit, the number one purpose is getting the money in to run the nonprofit. And I like just being a little old LLC that's not in it for the money. I've already done that for an entire lifetime, so I enjoy just being able to devote everything to doing what we do.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, that's why they were created, so you could be nimble and responsive. And then when it didn't serve your purpose, you could get rid of it.
I wonder if you could, like, for your art, of course, there would have to be some, like, periodic regularity here, but if you could set something up like a Substack to kind of cover your art project and, get people to subscribe to it through that. Patreon, obviously, would be another one.
Uh-huh.
Get subscribers. Have you thought about?
I thought about that, and frankly, I just don't think I had the critical mass until maybe now. Maybe not, but maybe now. I mean, I have a donate button on the site, allthewaytohell.com, and but I have never put it in. I'm going to send out a newsletter. I've never directed people to it, but I am getting a few small donations. So I think I'm much more comfortable. Let me finish this Oklahoma project. And so that's like proof of concept. It's proving to me that this crazy idea actually works, and it's proving to anybody who cares that, I get things done. So it's
it's interesting to be working with art that's more conceptual, that doesn't necessarily have a really concrete deliverable as such. And, people look at that and they say, well, is this really art? So sometimes you have to take some time to explain, yes, this is art.
Well, when I was starting out, I remember, oh gosh, when was this? When I was just thinking about the project, I was with a bunch of artists, and of course it's like, what are you working on? And I said, I'm not even sure it's art, but let me tell you about this idea I have. And then we would just have the conversation, and it's fun. And I'm still, it's art because I say it's art. So
I think you've discovered what you need to make it work. I see that you figured out how to make Negronis, and once you know how to make a Negroni,
yeah,
those are real powerful drinks, by the way.
Yes, they are. No, it's yeah. You have to be careful, but yeah, and I think. In my previous life, I just had to figure stuff out. I had to go figure out technology I didn't understand and communicate it to other people. That is exactly what I'm doing now. I had to go figure out a business I knew nothing about. And not only communicate, but intervene. So, and in a way that I think has some efficacy. And I've got other ideas too, and they're going to incubate over the next year, and we'll see what happens. I'm sure many will fall off the table because they don't work. And then, and they'll still be hybrids. It's kind of like, when I was in Austin, I had that weird hybrid position. It wasn't quite academic. It wasn't quite business. And I think that's just, I tend
all of the above.
Yeah, and I just tend to find myself in those positions, which is...
Well, remember how much fun that was. I mean, for all the miserable things we had to put up with from time to time, we were having fun, too.
Well, and I would describe this in the same way. It's, miserable because, I mean, look, the art world has certainly rejected me. One thing I have been able to do over COVID is apply for everything. And I know that's what artists are doing, because so many didn't even have access to their studios because everything was closed down. So everybody was sitting at home writing applications. And that's the one thing I could do with all the other responsibilities in my life.
Maybe Juxtapose will do a write-up on this.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah.
Well, let them know.
Well, I've always been a big fan of art that didn't hang on a wall. Living out in the Bay Area for so long in Berkeley and Oakland, I met a lot of those kind of artists. I was fascinated by when it was Christo that did the running wall of fabric, and I went out and I walked on that, and it still resides in my mind. So that's that's an interesting concept of art. It doesn't exist in the physical world, but it exists in people's minds. They remember what it was like to experience the project.
And it took them. Even they would say that was just the physical manifestation of it. The actual project was getting 27 odd landowners and public entities at federal, state, and local levels. They could have done that project on a single piece of land. There was a very large landowner who offered up access, and they rejected it because the project was knitting together a bunch of people who, a lot of them were very skeptical. They didn't, and a lot of them were just outright negative in the beginning, and some of them stayed that way. So the project, and a lot of this was Jean-Claude. Remember, it was Christo and Jean-Claude, because she apparently was the one with the charm, and so in pulling this off, it was actually a triumph of bureaucracy. That's imprinted on your mind decades later.
This made me think about Banksy, and kind of the way Banksy operates. I was watching a video the other day of the self-shredding piece of art that they sold, and as soon as they had it hanging there and they were in the auction, and it may even have already sold, and then suddenly, it starts shredding, and then they got even more money for it after the shredding.
Yeah. No, I mean I don't even know what you call that. This kind of, clearly just spectacular promotional, or creating these spectacles. But I started this project initially because it made me laugh. I thought it was really, really funny. And since then you get into the tragedy of the history of the actual territory, and there's so much to unpack, but it's still funny. And I think that's why a lot of people participate. But people aren't uniform. I actually don't know why most of the people sign up, but I think Scoop, are you the one who called it like flipping the middle bird or something to maybe that was the last time we talked, to flip off the oil industries, and it is, to go do something Gonzo-like and Banksy-like, but also I know a couple of millennials and older Gen Zs have told me they signed up because they think it might be the only piece of property they'll ever own.
Yeah, and that's very realistic because you can see where property is living now. It's not living in individuals, families, and it's mostly being vacuumed up by big corporations who have, millions of properties. But the funny thing is, these kind of conceptual art projects, I can think of one that actually grew into something totally different, and that's Burning Man. Because I remember the first Burning Man was on a beach with a little, wood sculpture that was just supposed to be a conceptual, you set it on fire and you go home, well, and that was it. But that one grew into something that's totally different. I guess it might be considered conceptual art, but anyone that's gone to it's kind of a nightmare. But but I still remember that whole thing. I knew some artists who were part of Burning Man #1, and at the time that was just it blew my mind to understand that these people did that, and it kept on going and growing into a monster.
There's something like in Santa Fe, they have this thing called Zozobra, and so they build this kind of large structure, and the idea is you write the troubles from the past year, or your fears or regrets, and you stick the piece of paper inside the figure, and then they set the figure on fire. And that too was designed by artists, I think in the 1920s or 30s. And so and while it's still a big community thing, it didn't grow to anything like, or mutate into anything like Burning Man. It's still kind of a sweet local thing.
Santa Fe also has Meow Wolf.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's kind of amazing. Yeah, then they've got one in Las Vegas now, and I think Denver's about to get a Meow Wolf. So they're starting to expand their operations.
Well, so I was in Santa Fe for 2 years, and I was there as they hadn't opened their big, event center, or I don't even know what to call it, the place they have now, but they had put on a couple shows that were these art experiences, but it's so sensorial and wonderful. People really loved it. But now that they have, they've acquired, risk capital, and that's, that their eyes are on dollar signs. People have gotten kind of cynical about it. But it's a way for creative people to make a living doing what they love. I don't know anything about the company itself and, what it's like to work for them, but
I think they're a collective.
Yeah, but I mean, they're
like a co-op.
I don't think so. Like their actual corporate structure, I don't think so at all.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There's actually some, what used to be Austin-based risk capital is now in that deal.
Yeah, when venture capital shows up, that generally means it's a little less groovy than it once was.
But I haven't seen it. I've heard different people's reports. I do think in the early days that it was run more like a collective, and then they had a patron, and George R.R. Martin, and so it was a Renaissance model. It wasn't a venture model at all. I mean, maybe that's what they always intended. Again, I'm totally an outside observer.
So you see this thing, they have a Meow Wolf Workers Collective, but
I would want to look at the corporate structure. I can't imagine risk capital would go into that. But who knows? I could be totally wrong.
Yeah, well, I worked with Pacifica Radio, and we had workers collectives, but we didn't own the radio stations. Like KPFA and KPFT. The workers could organize and be a collective, but people that actually wrote the checks for the property and for the transmitting towers, they were not in the collective.
I turned my web development business into a cooperative, and we did better as a cooperative than I was doing just as a guy running a business.
Sure. I mean, they could have any number. They could be, employee owned and still attract venture capital. I have no idea. But
I don't think co-ops. Yeah, there's a structure for investment in co-ops. We ran into this. We were trying to build another big co-op, which was a longer story that I won't get into. But one of the things we did find out is that there's a lot of ways to create multi-stakeholder ownership in a cooperative. And you can define one stakeholder class as vendor. I mean, not vendor, but investor. And the investors would get some kind of return on their investment and might have some limited say in governance. You know, yeah, it all depends. It's just all in how you define the structure, and there's some flexibility and room for creativity in defining the structure of a co-op.
Sounds like the concept of common stock versus preferred stock in a corporation.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. But we are out of time. We have actually reached the end of our hour. Can you believe it? We've been sitting here having all this fun, and suddenly we're out of time. If we were doing this in person, we would be ordering our Negronis right now.
We sure would.
Well, I have some Japanese gin waiting for me in the other room. Remember, I think I told you online about Roku Gin, and this is not a sponsor. I just like it.
Well, maybe they will be now. Yeah.
Come back again.
I will. Well, are you guys still doing your happy hours?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
You want to do one of those?
Yeah, you should do it. You should get Roku to sponsor your house.
Oh, there we go.
Not a bad idea.
Well, I'll at least provide the Roku for me. Of course, it's online, but I'll hold it up for you to witness.
Right. We should have a Negroni themed happy hour.
Okay.
We will follow up with you about scheduling a happy hour visit.
Okay.
Well, thanks so much.
I enjoyed it, fellas.
You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. With John Lepkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.